Hi everyone. In the last version of Employee Management System 2.0, we used JDBC to interact with the database and to persist the database permanently. Now we are upgrading this application to version 3.0 to overcome the limitations of JDBC. So JDBC API has few limitations like boilerplate code. So in order to use JDBC, we have to write a lengthy code to perform the database operations. And also, when we are fetching the data from the database using JDBC, we have to manually map that data with the Java class. And third limitation is JDBC provide limited support to transactions. So basically transactions are used in those scenarios when we inserting the data in the database and during the insertion we found any issue or any exception occurred. So automatically transaction code roll back the insertion. In order to overcome these limitations, now in the latest version of EMS 3.0, we are going to use Hibernate ORM. So it is ORM, object relational mapping, so it will overcome the limitations of EMS 2.0. In order to use Hibernate, we have to download Hibernate libraries. So this is the link from where we can download all the required libraries we need to use Hibernate. Let's add the Hibernate libraries. In order to add the libraries, right click on the project and open module settings. And in the left side, choose libraries and choose plus symbol from here. Choose Java and choose the path where your Hibernate downloaded folder is available. So under the Hibernate release folder, there is a folder labs, and under labs there will be a folder required. So we need all these jar files to use Hibernate. Select all and open. So now Hibernate libraries are added in the project. Just apply and OK. Now our application is ready to use Hibernate. In order to verify the libraries, go to libraries, then org. Now here you can see Hibernate folder exists and it will contains all the required Hibernate libraries. Now moving to the coding part of Hibernate. First of all, we have to create an entity class. Name it as employee entity. Now use the same variables here that we used in the employee bean. So this class is similar to the employee bean we used earlier, but in order to make it entity, we have to use some annotations. Now first annotation is @entity that we will use at class level, which designate this class as entity, and this entity class is a part of Java X.persistence package. @table, here we will define the name of the table, imply. So these are the two annotations, @entity and @table, that we need to use at class level. And further, to @id annotation is used to define the primary key, and also we have to define the way how the primary key value will be generated using the annotation generated value. And here we have to specify the strategy, and we will define sequence. Now annotations we used @entity, @table, @id, and @generated value to specify it is a entity class. So these annotations will be used by the Hibernate or JP API to perform the TP operations. Now create the getter and setter corresponding to these variables. So our class is ready to use Hibernate. Save it. We have created entity class. Now create a DAO class for Hibernate. Just copy the old DAO class and we will make the changes in this class specific to Hibernate and name it as imply Hibernate DAO. Now we need to make use of session factory instead of this connection object. So this is the first change. And import it. Now second change is while making the connection, first of all change the variable name here, check the null, and here configuration class will be used. And it will be a org Hibernate configuration package. Now specify your entity class first. After specifying the entity class, define some configurations. So we will use set property method of configuration class. It is accepting as key value pair. So the key will be the key where we will define the property of the Hibernate and we will also give the value. So first very important property is driver class. So we are going to use org.h2.driver class. URL will be the same we used earlier in JDBC. Then username and password of the database management system. And also very important property is the dialect. So there will be different dialect classes corresponding to each database. So we are going to use H2. So we will use H2 dialect class. Then Hibernate to DDL, we will use update and show SQL and format SQL. So basically these two properties used whenever Hibernate perform any DB operation. So internally what SQL query is used, it will be print in the logs. So these are the very important properties for Hibernate. No need of this connection of JDBC, just to remove it. And now file in the service registry. This is another step in the connection configuration of Hibernate. And we have to create and build the session factory object using the service registry and configuration object. So Hibernate will create the table if not exist automatically. So there is no need of this create table manual method to create. Just remove it. So we replace JDBC connection with Hibernate connection. So first of all, we define one session factory reference and then configuration class used to specify the entity class as well as to specify the Hibernate connection related properties. So now this configuration provided us build session factory method, and this method requires an object of type service registry, and this service registry encapsulate our configuration properties. Let's make the changes in the add imply method specific to Hibernate. So fill imply entity class and pass the values coming in the imply bean. So now in the imply entity class, there is no constructor which takes name and department. So let's create this constructor. So this is the parameterized constructor. Also need to create default constructor as well. So in the employee entity class, we created parameterized constructor, which will take name and department. ID is auto generated in Hibernate, so there is no need to pass any ID, and also create a default constructor. Now we have a employee entity class object with values coming in the employee bean. So there is no query required, so just delete it. And then session factory dot open session. The open session method is used of session factory to get the session, because before performing any DB operation, we need a session object. Import it. Now here we are going to insert a record in the DB using Hibernate. So on the basis of session object, we need to begin the transaction. It will return reference of type transaction. Import this transaction and then commit this transaction and close the session. So now no need of rest of the JDBC related code. So here after begin the transaction, we need to call a function save to insert the record. Session provide us a method save, pass the employee entity, and it will return the newly generated primary key of type integer. We need to pass it. So now add a check. If result not null and its value is greater than 0, then update the message. So that's it. These are the basic changes required in add imply method. Let's recap it. So first of all, whenever we use Hibernate, we have to use entity classes, the employee entity we created. So just fill the data coming in employee bean class in the entity. So in the employee entity class, we created one parameterized constructor and we are passing name and department. Now this employee entity object has two values, name and department. The ID will be auto generated. So next, to perform any DB operation using Hibernate, we need to open the session using the session factory object. It will return object of type session, and using the session object, we call a method begin transaction to start the transaction. It will return object of type transaction, and session object provides a method save and need to pass entity class object, and it will save the data available in the employee entity class into database. So it will return the newly created primary key as integer. We added the check just to verify record inserted or not. Result not equal to null and result is greater than 0, then we are updating message variable with message employee added successfully. And once we perform the operation save, we need to commit the transaction. So transaction object provides a method commit, and then after committing the transaction need to close the session, and we are returning the message from here. This is a change we need in add imply method. And in case of get all imply, we will create again session using session factory. Then here we are going to create a list of type imply entity, and we will call a method create native query with session object and pass the SQL query. Also, we need to specify which type of records we need. So it will automatically map the records coming from the DB into employee entity class. And we need to call a method list. Now we have a list of employee entity, but we need to return list of type employee bean. Let's convert it. So first add a check if lst employee entity is not null, then iterate the list employee entity collection object. And create an object of type employee bean and pass the employee ID, name, and department. And add this object in the list. Then close the session and return the object, and there is no need of rest of the JDBC related code. So let's recap it. We created session object. With the session object, we called a method create native query. Then we pass the SQL query to get all the records from the DB and specify the entity class. Then This list method will execute and get all the records from the DB and will store in this list. We are just checking the null. If this object is not null, we are iterating this list employee entity list and get all the records from this employee entity object and storing in the employee B. And finally, we closing the session and returning the list. Employee Hibernate DAO is ready with the Hibernate changes. Now let's execute the application. And before executing the application, one more change we need in the employee DB service. If you see, currently we are using employee DAO. It is the class which actually uses the JDBC, but now change this with the Hibernate. So now we changed this class name from employee DAO to employee Hibernate DAO. This is the only change we need in employee DB service. Now we can execute the application to test the functionality. Before start the application, if anyone while executing the application getting this exception related to unsupported database file, it is recommended to resolve it. Just download the latest jar file of H2 database from this link, and in the Intel IJ remove the existing jar file and add the latest jar file related to the H2 database. So it will resolve the issue. Now let's try and execute this application. Now verify, is there any existing record available? No. So let's add few records. Employee added again. Employee added. Now we have added 3 records. Now check the list of existing records. So these are the 3 records we just added: Aman, Deepak and Rohit. Now exit from the application. Again execute the application and check the list of employees. So now these are the 3 records we added before termination the application. So it means records are successfully storing in the database using the Hibernate implementation.